Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well. So the major stock markets are very close to making all-time highs, as we can see here on this chart. And we're going to explain what this potentially means for the stock markets for the next several months as we head into 2024 and beyond. And I'm also going to explain the meaning and the significance of this chart you're seeing here, and also this chart of the Elliott wave counts. All right, guys, join me. All right, guys, welcome back. Before we start, let me just wish you a fantastic and wonderful Christmas holiday and also an amazing New Year. As you can probably guess, I'm not in London anymore. I'm actually in sunny Florida. It's good to escape the cold weather we had in Europe and in London and just come to somewhere, again, beautiful and sunny like here in Palm Coast, Florida. By the way, one thing I'm looking forward to this Christmas is just sitting down and relaxing for a while. I haven't had much time to read, so I'm planning to do some reading this Christmas. One book I'm reading right now, which is really fascinating, is a 200-year-old book written in the 19th century by Ludwig Feuerbach, and it's called The Essence of Christianity. Really fascinating book if you're into religion and psychology. All right, guys, let's take a walk here and we can talk about the markets. And by the way, what I want to talk about in this video is specifically the chart of the stock markets and what this particular chart, the sentiment cycle, means for the stock markets in 2024, and also the significance of Elliott wave theory for the markets. So as I said at the beginning of this video, the stock market's very close now to making all-time highs. So before we go into what this potentially means for the markets in 2024, let's just do a quick recap. You may recall at the beginning of this year, in January and February of this year, I repeated many times that I was bullish on the stock markets. By the way, you probably noticed recently in the last few weeks, a lot of YouTubers and analysts on YouTube are saying, oh, the market's going to explode and go much higher. But the question is, where were these YouTubers and analysts 12 months ago, about a year ago? Well, I can tell you, at the beginning of 2023, at the beginning of this year, most analysts and YouTubers were extremely bearish and pessimistic on the stock markets, calling for a crash. But as you may recall, I went against that view and I held this view for most of this year. In fact, here's a very short clip from our member videos and we'll come back.
Whenever this goes from extreme oversold to overbought, that essentially is a very bullish signal. It's often a sign that the bear market has come to an end. I think we completed wave 1, wave 2, and now we are in the wave 3, taking us at least, at a minimum, to 44.57, 44.17.
All right, guys, as you heard in the member videos from the beginning of this year, and even from January, February to the spring of this year, I've been calling for much higher levels to be reached in the stock market. Now, after we reached our targets in the summer of this year, back in late July, beginning of August, I began to warn of a potential pullback in the stock market. We're actually seeing a lot of over-optimism and indeed extremes in greed and positive sentiment, which means what? Which means danger for the market, potential risk coming ahead. I think the odds and the risk is increasing for some kind of a multi-week pullback or correction in the market. By the way, the market's pulled back a bit deeper than I had anticipated, but nonetheless, it is what it is. Now, as I'm sure you probably know, back in October of this year, I got quite bearish on the stock market. In fact, when we broke those support levels. Now, of course, in hindsight, I realized that was a wrong call and that was a false signal in October. But we also have to appreciate that as human beings, we're going to make mistakes. We don't have a crystal ball and we're not going to get things right every single time. The markets are chaotic and uncertain, so we have to appreciate that everybody's a genius in hindsight. But when we make decisions and analysis, we're doing it in real time. So it's quite different when we see things in hindsight and in real time. Now, of course, at the beginning of November, I changed my mind and I became neutral on the market. So not bullish or bearish, and I was waiting for confirmation to show us a high probability of what the market was going to do next. And you may recall, I said the confirmation signal would be if the stock market took out the July highs, because that would increase the probability of a move towards the all-time highs. And of course, we took that level out some weeks ago at the July highs. By the way, I should add that this move, this rally we see in the S&P and the stock markets is extremely unusual. We don't typically see this kind of extended extreme rallies with very shallow pullbacks. Again, these are unusual, very rare. So the bottom line is, what does it mean for the markets now? As we can see, the markets are not far away from making all-time highs, and it's quite likely we can take that level out very soon. And the question now becomes, okay, where are we in the big picture? So there are two charts I want to look at here. The first thing I want to look at is what's called the sentiment cycle. In other words, the sentiment cycle shows to us the different emotions that people feel at different stages in the market. Okay, so I'm talking about emotions like optimism, greed, and pessimism, fear, and then we have anxiety and euphoria and things like that. So there's a whole bunch of emotions that people go through at different stages in the market cycle. And the sentiment cycle shows to us quite beautifully different stages and different emotions that people feel in different stages of the markets. So I think when we look at the markets in the big picture, it seems quite likely, in my view, that we are in the last gasp stage of the stock market. Okay, so the last gasp stage is kind of the last climax, the last intake of breath for the stock markets before a major top in the stock markets and then a subsequent reversal and then of course a long-term bear market. Now I want to be very clear about this. Even though I'm saying we could be in the last gasp stage, the last climax of the market, I'm not suggesting this could be short-term. No, this could actually take many months, perhaps to the end of 2024. So please don't be confused by this terminology, by these words. The last gasp stage, the last climax of the markets, this could take many months, potentially towards the middle to the end of 2024. And I think by that time we'll see much higher levels in the stock market. I think the S&P potentially could go over the 4,900, over 4,950. And by the way, guys, check out the member updates and the member videos, because in the next few weeks I'll discuss more precisely what are the likely targets and the likely levels the market could go to. Now, I should also warn that typically after such extreme moves we see in the market, it's quite probable we see a pullback, okay? So the market never goes in one direction. There's always pullbacks, glitches along the way. By the way, it's worth noting that on the weekly chart of the S&P, we're seeing that the RSI, the 2 setting, the short-term setting of the RSI has reached overbought conditions, extreme overbought conditions. And typically after overbought conditions like this on the RSI, we see a pullback. Even if it's just a minor temporary pullback, that still is quite likely in my view. So I think we're going to see some kind of a pullback, retracement in this rally very soon. So for example, we could see a pullback to some key support levels or some key averages in the markets. But as I've said in this video, I think it's quite likely that once the pullback is out of the way, we're probably going to see much higher levels in the stock market in this last gasp stage of the market, which by the way, also happens to be, in my view, the final wave 5 of 5 of the stock market. So in the big picture, in the big Elliott wave model, the wave 5 of 5, okay, so as we know, markets usually trend in 5 waves. The last section of a bull market rally is called the wave 5 of 5. And as I mentioned in this video, guys, the last wave 5 of 5 could extend a lot higher than we can imagine. So please don't think it's going to be short term. No, this could last several months, perhaps to the middle or the end of 2024, before finally we see a top in this market. Again, the market could rally and be up at least 10% from where we are after some kind of a pullback or retracement. And as we know, that neatly coincides and correlates with the Benner cycle, this 150-year-old cycle chart, which was devised by Samuel Benner, which also seems to predict some kind of a top in 2026. Now, of course, I personally think the market top could be reached before 2026, probably at the end of 2024 or 2025. But my general view is that this last gasp stage of the market, this final breath, this last climax in the stock market, again, this could last several months, but eventually we're going to see some kind of a blow-off top in the stock market. And by the way, something interesting to note is that wave 5s usually complete in a blow-off top, sometime in the stock market, but also in Bitcoin as well. We'll talk about Bitcoin in a separate video. All right, guys, make sure you go ahead and check out the member updates, because in the member updates, I'll talk about the key support levels that the stock market could pull back to, and of course, the potential targets we could reach in 2024 for that wave 5. All right, guys, I want to wish you a fantastic Christmas and a wonderful holiday, and also a brilliant new year as well. Thanks very much indeed. Bye for now.